Terry Wireman. If you don't know him, he's the author of over 28 books on maintenance reliability. Operator-driven reliability is the new one that's going to come out fairly soon, hopefully. And he's been a huge contributor and a supporter to everything that we think at Reliability Web and Uptime Magazine. Been a huge supporter for the Association for Maintenance Professionals and the development of the Certified Reliability Leader Program. Please make Terry feel welcome. Give him a large hand here, please.
Thanks, Terry. I appreciate that. It's great to I got to figure out which button I'm going to push now. It's great to spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon talking about line of sight, and certainly it's been very exciting to have the announcement made earlier this morning, so I'll just probably echo what's been said a lot by everyone else. It's fantastic, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of people here. So kudos to all of my compatriots that helped put this together. Sometimes you think it was like herding cats. I know Reese probably had his hands full more than once, but I would actually say it was probably worse than that. It was probably like herding mountain lions, and because there was always something that came back. I can skip the bio. Terry did a real good job on that, and I will jump right straight to the flow that I want to get into. Asset management, I'm not going to have to speak much about that because I understand that's been covered well today. And then the second line as well. But I do want to spend quite a bit of time on line of sight because to me this is a piece that most maintenance and reliability professionals have struggled with over the years, and I think organizations are going to have to work hard to develop this to be successful implementing asset management. And so we'll go through how it's established, and then we'll look at about 3 or 4 key pitfalls that you can walk into if you're not careful. We'll talk a little bit about how to overcome those, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up. So asset management, and again, I don't know if this has been referenced too much this morning because I wasn't able to be in this session. Probably one, in my opinion, one of the best written documents for an overview on asset management is the Asset Management Anatomy. And it is available for download at the IAM website. And there's a copy of it floating around up here. I knew David would have something like that. But if you really want to get your feet wet and understand what asset management's about, that is, in my opinion, the best place you can possibly start. And there's some other intellectual property that they have there as well that is very beneficial to read through. So when we think about asset management, we're really trying to take what our organization's in business for and then saying, do we have the right assets to do this? How do we utilize these assets? How do we deliver value from these assets to meet the overall business objectives of the company? And there's a lot of things that I'm probably repeating some of the things from this morning that you have to keep in mind, that it is truly a total value approach because you have things that are hard to dollarize like risk. Sometimes sustainability is hard to dollarize. Hopefully we can have a good handle around our costs and how they relate to performance. But it's very important to understand that we don't do asset management just for asset management's sake. You're doing it to add value to your organization. And that's why I use some of the definitions out of the standard. When you get your copy, you can look at 3.2.1. Something that has potential or actual value to an organization. And while it acknowledges other types of assets, there's a lot of application to physical assets in the standard. And for most maintenance and reliability professionals, that's where your focus is going to be. So again, acknowledging there's other types of assets such as leases and brands and intellectual property, those types of things. But a lot of what was written for physical assets. Now, asset management then becomes a coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from the assets. So, how do we do that? Well, when you think about value realization, you're contributing to profitability, and there's all kinds of factors. In fact, it's something that's not new if you're a fan of Industry Week. What's one of their key performance indicators that they use on their best plant survey? It's return on assets. So do we really understand what return on asset is? do we understand profitability versus expenses? Are we able to do that calculation? And I've been in the business a long time, and I know some of you know me quite well, but I get pretty passionate about this, which I find disturbing, is there are still companies today, a lot of companies today, that you walk into the maintenance organization, and when you go, when that piece of equipment's down, what are we losing? They don't have a clue. They have no idea what value or lack of value that asset has when it's performing or not performing. So again, we're back to the basics, and some of this you're going to have to sit down and say, okay, what does this asset do for us? And when it's running 75% of what it was designed to do, what are we losing? And it can't just be burden rate of somebody's labor. You've got to understand the value from a performance and a product perspective. This is another thing that's going to come back into play, in my opinion, is going to come back into play very strongly in asset management, and that's understanding life cycle costing for your equipment. And we have a lot of people today that have kind of fogged the mirror, so to speak, and we don't see real clearly about some of this. But up to 95% of the life cycle of your asset, the cost of the life cycle, is determined in the design phase. It's not incurred till later on, which is what the graph is showing us here, but it's determined over here. Yet today, and we're going to start working towards our line of sight concept, today, how often does our design engineers talk to our process engineers, who talk to our maintenance engineers, who talk to our where's that line of communication in most organizations? Does it really exist? Sometimes it's informal. I jot down a note and send it to somebody, and they jot down a note. But how many of us are really keeping real accurate data? If we went into whatever CMMS or EAM system that you use and we started looking at acquisition cost of assets, how much of that information that's in there is real? See, so we've got another level that we have to step up to. In fact, it's not like it's new. I'm going to give you an oldie but a goodie. Here's a textbook that's written a long time ago. Nakajima's Blue Book, The Introduction to TPM. What? Mid-70s time frame? Up to 95% of all maintenance costs are specified in the design phase of an equipment's life cycle. Efforts to reduce life cycle costs after the design phase will affect only 5% of the overall figure. How much money do we spend in the maintenance and operations phase of an asset's life cycle trying to fix it because we didn't really look at the cost in the design phase? Do we expect our maintenance people to do what the design people should have done? And where's that line of communication, visibility that we need to have? Do we really specify maintenance costs when we develop a budget? Or are we really just trying to manage the maintenance cost? You see, the costs were already specified. There's not much you can do about it. It's like your car. You know when you've got to change oil. You know when you've got to change filter. You know when the tires are going to wear out. You know that that's got to be allocated. In maintenance today, we have people that run around going, oh, we need to reduce our maintenance cost. Oh, good luck on that. Where were they put in at? Don't you all hear that, though? So, strategic asset management, the plan, is basically derived from the organization's overall plan. So when your organization buys an asset, what's the plan for the asset? What do we plan on doing with it? How do we plan on keeping it close to design specifications? How much of your equipment do you have today that was purchased years ago that you've got in the plant, the facility, and you're using it, but it performs at 50% of what it used to because it's old and worn out and needs to be replaced? What was the original strategic asset management plan for that asset? What did you plan on doing with it? When was it supposed to be refurbished? When was it supposed to be reset? Do we think about those things and quantify them as part of an overall plan? Just some interesting questions. Okay, here we go with the fun part. You'll notice that a lot of my friends are laughing because these graphics caused us much consternation. And in fact, when they were going over them, somebody put a shock collar on me, and I never know who had the button. But we had a lot of arguments and discussions, I guess that's a more polite word, about graphics. This is not the graphic that actually made it into the standard. This one has an extra circle because I liked that circle. But it is not in the standard. That circle is missing for some reason. But I put it up there because I want you to understand a little bit about some of the negotiations that went on. To get that graphic in, that circle had to disappear because there was contingents inside the groups that did not like life cycle appearing on the diagram. So it didn't appear on the diagram. But I wanted you to understand that it is a flow. We have the asset. First of all, we're going to set the direction. This is what we're going to do as a company. These are the assets. This is what we need the assets to do. This is a system we're going to put in place to make sure we keep our assets doing that. I like this one because there's, and I believe one of my cohorts from the UK actually said this, these are the things we do to assets. And so that's how I like that still. And then this is the assets that are within the scope of the asset management system. Because you've got some assets you're not going to put a lot of effort into managing. They may fall out. Just like in your ISO 9000. You've got certain equipment that doesn't fall under the 9000 banner. There's also certain assets that don't have to fall under the 55,000 banner for you to become certified. It's just that process may not be certified. So when we look down that list, big picture, what the departments can do, the system to make sure we keep doing it, the things that we do to those assets. Nice structure, nice process. It needs to be formalized. We don't do that in most organizations today. So that's just kind of additional clarification on that. What do you need your assets to do? When you buy an asset, what do you expect it to do? It was designed to do something, wasn't it? The design engineers picked it up. How many companies today really understand the design capabilities of their assets? In my opinion, that's one of the biggest problems with overall equipment effectiveness. How many people are really good at calculating OEE? OEE is pretty simple because, availability is one thing. That's pretty easy to understand. Quality rate's another thing. What's the number that always hangs us up? Performance efficiency. What was the asset designed to do versus what we make it do? I've seen people that have performance efficiencies of 120%. And you go, how's that possible? 100 should be the best you can do. Well, we really used to make it do that. Now we make it do this, and we get extra credit for that. And you're going, why calculate it? Do we understand what our assets were supposed to do for us? Do we understand how we keep them in that condition by doing these things? Just questions, but it makes us step back and examine what we're doing. So a little bit about that. Past 55, I understand, was covered quite well. So I don't need to go through the 3 documents and what they do. Now we want to talk a little bit about line of sight. And that's really the theme of the presentation. If you think about this diagram for a moment, and the colors don't look real good on that, do they? So you might have to go to the presentation itself. I can't even get this to work now. It doesn't want to be part of the game. If you think about a business goal, we're typically trying to produce some type of shareholder value. We're trying to increase profits. And from a bottom line perspective, if you think about your company, you're going to increase your revenues or you're going to reduce costs. In some cases, you can do both. But those are the typical paths that you will take. Now, how do I increase revenue as a financial strategy? Well, I can increase the availability, and if I'm not in a capped market, I can make more product and I can sell it, and that helps my revenue. So availability of the equipment, but I can also make the equipment run closer to design, or I can redesign it to increase its capacity. And as it gets over here, I might actually do capital investment and buy more equipment to increase my capacity if the market demand's there. But reducing costs, some of you are familiar with this concept, I can reduce expenses, which maintenance falls in there someplace, or I could reduce my capital investment. Because if you start thinking about, we look at return on assets, it's profitability divided by the dollar valuation of your assets. If I've got less assets to produce the same product because they're producing better, then overall I'm increasing my capacity. I've increased revenue. The reducing capital investment is where I was headed. I can extend the capital life. I can reduce the equipment. I can eliminate redundancy or excess assets. So less assets, lower cost, more profits. So looking down that list, if you start thinking about all the different things, I can reduce downtime, I can achieve design reliability, I can improve my asset efficiency, I can increase capacity by buying new equipment, I can control expenses, although that gets focused on too often, and it's not the magic answer that everybody likes to think it is, and I can defer or eliminate capital expense. Some of the statistics that people don't stop and realize, well-maintained equipment can last up to 40% longer than poorly maintained equipment. So how long can I continue the utilization of the assets that I have versus buying new assets? Now, I can tell you from my background's in steel. I came out of one of the largest integrated steel plants in the United States. And in the 60s, we had an overhead crane that was in a building that was used mainly for storage, but it was an overhead crane, still functional. It was purchased in 1914. Now, that's longevity out of any asset, no matter what you think, but they properly maintained it. It produced. Do we think about replacing assets prematurely, or do we make them produce the way that they should? Line of sight concept. Now let's think about this for a moment. What if I take all of my functional departments out here that I typically find in a company, and I establish a line of sight that connects each one of them to increasing profits and shareholder value? Is there a way for my design engineering department to contribute to shareholder value? Can design engineers? If you don't think so, real quick, just run this little calculation. How many pieces of equipment do you have in your plant that do exactly the same thing that you've bought from different suppliers that require different spare part kits, different skills to operate and maintain, and different training to be able to qualify to maintain? Does that number start to get pretty big? Because design engineers don't standardize on a certain design and carry it through? Project engineering, how we install our equipment, how we schedule our equipment, how we operate our equipment, how we maintain it, our spare parts, which we touched on, how we buy things, having the right skill sets, which HR should be looking for, how we finance it, and finally, how we manage the whole process. Do all of those departments have an impact over here? If you're going to play in the asset management field, you better figure out how to get all of these people to play together. Because if you leave any one of them out, you're going to suboptimize what you could have had over here. Think about this. We've got our business objectives. Typically, it's related to profitability, which was on the other diagram. So everybody has given their marching orders from these business objectives. All of these departments typically do something that's going to have an impact on these assets, which eventually is going to have an impact on whether or not we achieve our business objectives. Does everybody in these departments, because some of them, oh, there it is, my laser pointer's not working well. Each one of these departments in some way does something that impacts this. If we're going to have asset management, we have to get these people to work together. So here's kind of the challenge. How about a departmental line of sight? Everybody lining up, and we're all going to impact our assets. And so we've kind of got this functional department line in the line of what I would consider to be a life cycle. So we decide we're going to set some objectives. We got to get new equipment. We figure out how we're going to buy it. We get it installed. We make sure we have the right skill sets and the right number of people. We schedule it correctly. We've purchased it correctly. We've got the right spare parts. We operate it and we maintain it. All of those departments do something here. If you leave them out, any of them, you will suboptimize this. So let's play with this. If we turn it around, business objectives now through the life cycle to the assets, we have a reasonable organizational line of sight. But the real challenge is departmental or functional departments line of sight. Think about our design engineer here, this group. How many of these groups does this group impact being able to do this? So in other words, how many decisions are made up here that suboptimize all these groups' ability to make a good decision for here? Does that make sense? You see where I'm headed with the question. So if I do a poor job here, does it impact this? It should, shouldn't it? If I don't do a good job here, does it impact the purchasing and spare parts groups? If I don't do a good job here, does it impact the number of operators in the operations group? If this one's going to hit close to home. If I don't do a good job here, does it impact what happens to this group? And finally, you think about design engineering. What if I put in a really neat, super sophisticated, high-speed packaging line, and I've got people that cannot add and subtract fractions and decimals out here? Do I need to consider what's here, or at least prepare these people to get ready so we can do this? The linkage is what I'm trying to get across to you. And hopefully you can see that I can't do this without all these people. Too often, we've heard some rumblings that people think that asset management is maintenance or reliability rebranded. It is not. It's a holistic look at your assets involving all these different groups. All of them have to play. All of them have to be a part of the initiative. Otherwise, a company cannot be successful. So we can pull any one of those blocks out and put it out here. What if I have an off-the-wall purchasing group that just thinks they run the whole company? That doesn't happen. Just theoretically, if we had that happen, okay? Would you find that they would have an impact on all of these different groups and their ability to perform over here? You see, do they understand their place? They've got a place in the group, but their place is not to dictate to these other departments. If design engineering comes up with an optimum design that across its life cycle is cheaper than low bid, shouldn't these folks listen? Shouldn't they look at what's going on? So too often low bid is not low life cycle cost. Too often purchasing doesn't get the data from some of these groups that they need to make that decision. But at the same time, do we see our role in influencing purchasing to make the right decision? There are a lot of impacts there. What about the HR group? Now, this may not hold true in all countries, but it's holding true particularly in the United States right now. How much of an impact does the HR group have on all of these departments and the assets? I'm going to isolate particular maintenance for right now. How many of you have a cap on the dollar value you're allowed to offer to the appropriate maintenance technician in your plant? Yeah. How many of your companies will not allow you to break that cap? How many of you, it's locked at HR. HR will not go above that. No matter what the demographics in your area say, that maintenance at this plant X is paid less than you guys pay them, or paid more than you guys pay them, excuse me. Have you run into that situation? I see some heads nodding. We've got companies today that are paying signing bonuses to get maintenance people in their plants to get around this. We've got organizations that are making some maintenance positions salaried to hire electronic technicians, instrumentation people, because they can't get them in under the salary cap. And here you thought salary cap was something you only had problems with in professional sports. Eh? Do we think about this? Because they can make the wrong decision and you're never going to optimize these assets. You don't have the right people there. And so what do you do to the assets to let the people operate them and maintain them? You dumb them down. Have you seen that happen in any of your plants? You start pulling out some of the sophisticated automation. You start going back to some manual type systems just so the right people can still run it. You see? Are we really playing in an asset management ballpark then? No, we're not. Because somebody has that asset somewhere in the world and they're making it produce better than you do. So you've already lost the asset management contest. Okay, let's take it on the chin here. Does maintenance also make decisions that impact all of those other departments? Yep. And you look at the maintenance decisions that we make. Sometimes they're made because we don't have the right data. Sometimes they're made because the equipment wasn't designed properly and put in, which was the other group that got us caught there. Sometimes we don't have the right spare parts. But there's a lot of things that maintenance can do to contribute to this as well. And again, as I said earlier, asset management's not just all about maintenance. But this is an opportunity when you look at all the things that are occurring in asset management to be successful. This is an opportunity for most maintenance and reliability professionals to really influence their future. This standard has the opportunity to get executive management attention. You can't typically get the 5-minute elevator speech with an executive just to talk about maintenance. But to talk about your role in asset management, you're probably going to get more than 5 minutes. You just have to make sure you start educating yourself through sessions like this, through reading some of the material that the IAM has. You have to get yourself educated so you can have that longer discussion about what you need to do for asset management. Linking to financials, linking to assets, linking to departments, can you now see how you need to have that line of sight that pulls it all together? You can't do it in isolation. Nobody can. We need to have everybody pulled together with a clear line of sight. And it needs to be financial to keep a C-level person's attention. What are some of the pitfalls? Well, we've kind of touched on them, but I'll put them on one slide for you. When we think about some of the line of sight pitfalls that we have, lack of communication. How many of these departments today are little silos? And they're siloed out, they don't talk to each other, we don't have communication, so how could we ever have a connected line of sight? That's why I'm kind of excited about one of our keynote speakers that are coming up this week, the gentleman that worked on the Zapped book. How many of you have ever read that book, Zapped? Now, see, there's still some old-timers around. No, just kidding. But that's an older book. But did we ever do that right? There's a company I know of that used them for a lot of their training. And they today still have a sustainable team-built organization. It's team-developed, team-run, that has been existing now for 23 years. It was not a flash, which most of them run into. Most of them will go for a couple years, and then the turnover takes care of it, and they're gone. This one didn't. This one is still going on because they established good lines of communication and broke down all of the silos. It is, in their industry, the single most productive plant for their product in the world. In fact, they've had companies from other parts. It's a union plant, too. Take that. They've had companies from other countries come in and study that operation because they've never seen anybody be able to do that with an American workforce. And they want to know how they can go back and do it. So good communication, no silos, that's very important. The second one I've already hit on a little bit, but the lack of understanding of the financial linkage. There's some companies, and I think it's a great tool. It's hard to stay consistent with, but it's a great tool. They actually have plates on a lot of their equipment lines that say when this line is down and it should be running, the company is losing, and they put the actual dollar amount in there on that plate. That way, the people that are involved with operations, maintenance, engineering, when they walk by and that line's down, and they go, well, we could fix that if we did this, they can do a quick mental cost justification. Should we spend that money to get, oh yeah, we'd make a lot of money if we just made that change. But if we never give people the money, if they don't understand the finances, we're never going to make the right decisions. And that cascades all the way through our asset management. Every department needs to understand how much of an impact they make on the asset's ability to meet the business objectives of the company, which is to make a profit. Lack of departmental understanding, the relationship between the departments. How I can make your job better and you can make my job better if we did these things. Now, Terry was giving me some grief. You don't know this, but he was giving me some grief about my number 6 book on the maintenance strategy series when he was doing the introduction, because it's somewhat overdue, which gets to be a running joke between publishers and authors, but nonetheless. But one of the problems I've had writing that book is the book was designed to produce a model of operator involvement that is sustainable. How many companies do you know have started operator involvement doing maintenance activities a half a dozen times? They try it, didn't work, try it, didn't work, try it, let's do this, try it, no. To create a sustainable model is difficult. And it's difficult because it's not a black and white financial thing, although there's a financial model to it. It's because it's cultural. How do you get people to change the way they think about work? How do I no longer view operations and maintenance? I see the lights came on. Okay, enough of that. How do I get them to change the competitiveness? Because a lot of times operations don't like maintenance, and maintenance doesn't like operations, and nobody likes engineering. How do I get that to change to where we're all focused and playing on a team? It's like being on sports teams, and I can't really hardly bring myself to talk about it because my team lost and I'm not happy. But how many times do we have a good offense and a good defense and no special teams? Doesn't work. How often in football do you have a good offense, no defense, and you have a lot of interesting high-scoring games, but we don't win? You see, we've got to look at how we work together to be successful, and that's the departmental understanding and organizational relationships. I love doing organizational design, but how many times when you start to design organizations do you really have to look at not what should work on an org chart, but will work in a plant because you've got different personalities, people, cultures, reward and recognition systems? How often when we get into organizational relationships do we reward bad behaviors? So if you think asset management is going to be easy, that it's a buzzword, it's not. There's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of things we have to correct about our companies today. But what's the reward? What does that give us? What's our payback? Those are the things that we have to look at. And having the line of sight connecting the financials will help us overcome a lot of things if we do it for the right reasons. So asset management's more than a departmental focus. Nobody can do it by themselves. And we hadn't passed the standard when I put this together, so Pass 55 is still up there. Some of you may be aware that there's other asset management standards that are out there that were kind of independently put together. But ISO 55000 will give us our first recognized attempt across the globe. But it's going to take a comprehensive, integrated organizational effort to make this successful. Financial, departmental, and organizational focuses all have to align on this line of sight, which is really helping to derive the maximum value from the assets. So having said that, I think I'm rolling up within my 5-minute time frame for questions. If you don't want to ask any questions in the open forum, I'll be around all week, or you can send me a note at my email address.
Hand for Terry, please.